China has condemned a speech by U.S. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth at the Shangri-La Dialogue in Singapore, accusing Washington of fueling regional tensions with a Cold War mentality and urging it not to play with fire. In his Saturday address at the high-profile Defense and Security Summit, Hegseth reportedly portrayed China as a threat to the region and made critical comments on issues including Taiwan and the South China Sea. Beijing's representative at the conference accused Hegseth of deliberately ignoring calls for peace and development from countries in the region and instead promoting a Cold War mentality for bloc confrontation.
Hegseth said the U.S. doesn't want a war but would be prepared to fight one.
We do not seek conflict with Communist China. We will not instigate nor seek to subjugate or humiliate. President Trump and the American people have an immense respect for the Chinese people and their civilization. But we will not be pushed out of this critical region. Again, to be clear, any attempt by Communist China to conquer Taiwan by force would result in devastating consequences for the Indo-Pacific and the world.
Journalist Adam Hancock is in Singapore, where he's been following the Shangri-La conference. Good to have you with us, Adam. Just wondering how that message from Pete Hegseth was received over there and whether this sends a clear signal to Beijing.
Yeah, I think it was very much heard loud and clear in this part of the world. He really made a big point of reaffirming Washington's commitment to this region, given that there were some doubts about the Trump administration and how much they want to engage in this part of the world. And he was very strong when he spoke about China, saying that they were harassing their neighbors in this part of the world and saying that the US will not allow China to dominate the Indo-Pacific. He also discussed Taiwan as well and the build-up of Chinese military options when it comes to any potential invasion in the future. But he said that invasion will not happen under President Trump's watch. So I think that message was loud and clear to Beijing, and I think that's why we've had a response from Beijing's foreign ministry. Remember, the Chinese defense minister, he's not here in Singapore this weekend. Beijing decided not to send him. Usually this morning on Sunday, we would get a keynote speech from the Chinese defense minister outlining their position. We've just had that statement from the foreign ministry, saying that the US is playing with fire when it comes to Taiwan.
And what has been the reaction from these Asian countries to Hegseth's call to boost defense spending?
I think it's been fairly mixed, in all honesty. There is some skepticism, as I said, about the Trump administration's commitment, particularly amongst countries in this region that have been hit hard in the president's trade war. And given the fact that they're now being asked to boost their defense spending from one of their closest allies, I think that certainly did cause some raised eyebrows here. One analyst that I spoke to yesterday said that a lot of countries in Southeast Asia, in the Asia Pacific, they don't agree with Pete Hegseth's assessment that the threat from China is very real and possibly imminent, and therefore they wouldn't see that as a reason to suddenly go and boost their defense spending. So I think there was mixed feelings on those comments. But what is interesting as well is it's not actually a huge change in policy from Washington. A lot of what Pete Hegseth said is, even though it was in much stronger terms, is following through with the Biden administration as well.
Do you get a sense that these countries feel they're torn between balancing a security relationship with the US and the economic relationship with China?
Absolutely. That's long been a problem for many countries in this region. They're caught in this tussle between two great superpowers, and it becomes harder for them when tensions rise. They don't want to be put in a position where they have to pick a side, because right now, going with both sides works very well for them. On the one hand, you have the economic might of China that so many countries rely on here, but then you also have the military might of the US as well. So lots of countries, like, for example, here in Singapore, they want to thread the fine line and keep both of them on side. The Malaysian Prime Minister spoke yesterday here at the Shangri-La Summit as well, and he was saying whilst Malaysia does welcome US interests in this region, they they are also committed to their relations with China as well. So, as I said, it gets a lot harder when tensions rise because eventually they could be put in a position where they do have to pick a side.
Adam Hancock reporting from Singapore. Thank you very much for speaking to us.
Thank you.
We are joined now by Meia Nouwens, Senior Fellow for Chinese Security and Defense Policy at the International Institute for Strategic Studies. And as we speak, Meia is at the Shangri-La Dialogue in Singapore. Meia, I wonder what you read into the speech from the U.S. Defense Secretary. Fair to say this is the start of a new approach to Asia, or no?
Well, I think it's clear that Secretary Hegseth wanted to make one thing very clear, and that is that the Indo-Pacific, as the U.S. terms it, remains the priority theater for the United States, despite the transition government to the Trump administration. I think that has been a question from allies and partners here in the region who have watched how U.S.-Europe relations have unfolded. And I think this was unequivocally a statement that Asia remains important to the United States. However, there are, of course, questions as to how strategies will unfold. There's clear commitments for defense. The U.S. also wants Asia to do more for its own defense and deterrence, just as we've seen in Europe. But it's a question still as to how this matches with a trade war, a tariff battle that many countries in this region still face as well.
Was Pete Hegseth right? Is China's threat to Taiwan and the region in general more imminent than ever before?
I think he said that it could be imminent, and I think there was a sense of urgency by what Secretary Hegseth was saying to the region. It is, of course, I think an important point to make. I don't think he was saying that war was inevitable. In fact, he said it is not inevitable. The United States does not seek war. But from the United States perspective, you are looking at a People's Liberation Army, a Chinese military that is procuring more advanced and more equipment, building capability incredibly quickly. And the question, of course, remains to what end? And so for Hegseth, the message really was, if there is going to be war, then countries in this region, together with the United States, need to prepare for it with much greater urgency.
As we mentioned earlier, we had a response from the Foreign Ministry, but should we expect to hear more?
I'm sure you will hear more. The Chinese, of course, vehemently deny this. Beijing has put out a few years ago its own global security initiative. It seeks to build partnerships here in the region with countries. It seeks to find solutions for Asian security for and by Asians, as we've heard at previous Shangri-La Dialogue editions. However, that being said, there remain tensions between China and countries in this part of the world, and particularly, as you will have noted, Japan, the Philippines, still claims and disputes over claims in the South China Sea. So it's going to be difficult to match for China as well, that rhetoric with action.
We have about half a minute, but I do want to get a little perspective here from you. What are the main takeaways from the conference?
I think the main takeaways here are that the region still looks to the United States to play a security role. However, it was also really interesting to listen to the keynote address by President Macron of France on the Friday night, whereby he said both Europe and Asia need to enter into a stage of strategic autonomy, that both have similar challenges, both face big neighbors, are find themselves in between the US and China. And so they need to find their own path, and perhaps they can be partners in this together. Big questions here, of course, are what resources does Europe have left for Asia at this point in time when it needs to take more priority for its own security at home. But nevertheless, it was an interesting point to make, and we'll see what progresses the rest of the year.
Meia Nouwens, many, many thanks.